r/NoSleep. Cabin Getaway. Written by Felix Blackwell. Part 1. My fiancée and I are from California, but her family lives in Colorado, and they own a cabin near Pikes Peak, way up in the mountains. After visiting them, they recommended we go stay at the cabin a few days. We are avid hikers and jumped at the opportunity. Colorado is very rich in Native American folk legend. Virtually every place you go used to belong to an indigenous community, and the few of them who remain keep the traditions and stories alive. Pikes Peak is no different. There are enough stories and gift shops to give anybody the sense that the land itself is alive. I don't know if this has anything to do with what is happening, but maybe someone here is from Colorado and could help us connect the dots. Fel and I are currently at the cabin. It's day 4, and we were planning on leaving today. But things have gotten very strange around here, and it looks like we are going to be here a while longer. We have enough food for a winter and the heater is in stellar order, but the Wi-Fi is terrible at best and there is virtually no cell reception. We feel isolated. I will try to respond to comments, but the internet dips out for hours at a time up here. The first weird thing that happened was the snow. There was no snow in the forecast, so we packed light, but on first night here, just our luck, a blizzard pounded the whole area. My little Corolla is basically a brick of ice outside, and there's no way I'm going to try to make the 6-mile drive down the mountain to the town. I blame myself for trusting Colorado in spring. After a day, Thursday, of lovely hiking and sightseeing, some really unsettling stuff started happening. When we returned to the cabin just before dusk, we found an enormous dream catcher dangling from a tree about a dozen yards from the back door. This wasn't the kind you're imagining, the kind you buy from a novelty shop. This thing was made from twigs and twine. And it's about 3 feet in diameter. Absolutely humongous. Neither Faye nor I was stupid enough to touch it. We're veteran horror movie fans, and we know that's how you get cursed. If the snow melts a bit, I'll get back out there and snap a picture of it and post it here. That night, while we were eating dinner, we heard a bunch of noises in the woods outside. Twigs crunching, leaves rustling, etc. This isn't unusual, because we saw some elk and deer on our hike, but the sounds were slow and purposeful. They stopped and started and were rhythmic, like someone was casing the area in a crescent shape around the cabin. I used my really bright tactical flashlight to look outside from the porch, but there was nothing. We stayed in all day on Friday, and just cuddled, hung out, played some of the board games we brought, and some of the Super Nintendo games they had in the cabin. Donkey Kong Country 2, I have considered stealing, because it's the greatest game ever made. It snowed again, and after dark, we started hearing more noises. Around 1 a.m., Faye woke me up and told me she was hearing a voice outside. I strained to listen, and I thought I could make out the sound of a man crying very far away, but his voice was drowned out by the wind, so I wasn't absolutely certain of what I heard. We went back to sleep, but again around 4:45 a.m., we heard him more distinctly and closer. He sounded like he was calling for help, but he would dip into another language that I've never heard before. We called the ranger station at the bottom of the hill using my cell phone, and they told us they'd get up there and check it out. We never saw them, and I doubt they ever came. On Saturday, shit got really scary. It snowed again in the morning, and I stopped getting service for most of the day. Faye and I watched movies and tried to Skype with her family, but that didn't work. She went to sleep early, around 8, while I did some photo editing on my laptop in the living room. She woke up crying hysterically. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she'd had a dream that she was lost in the woods outside, and something was following her. I cuddled with her until she fell back asleep, and eventually I drifted off too. Faye woke me up around 1 a.m. She was absolutely beside herself. I've never seen her so afraid in my life, and just the look on her face really unsettled me. She told me that she heard the man outside again, but she recognized the voice. She was absolutely convinced that it was her grandfather's voice, and that he was wandering around outside begging for help. Faye's grandpa died when we were seniors in college 4 years ago. I told her that she was dreaming, but then I heard the voice too. I never met the guy, so I wouldn't recognize his voice, but it did sound different from the night before. It sounded older. I had to do everything I could to keep her from running off into the woods looking for him. Eventually she realized that the possibility of it being him was absurd, so we put a movie on at a good volume and fell back asleep. My cell phone wouldn't connect a single call. What happened last night, Sunday, was the thing that has sent me over the edge. Essentially the same thing happened. Around 1 a.m., at which point I was still awake, almost expecting the noise to happen, I heard a voice. This time, it was a woman's. Thankfully it was distant enough that it didn't wake fair. I walked into the bathroom and cracked the window open just a tiny bit. The frosty air that came through that crack seemed like a death sentence to me as a Californian. Nobody could survive outside for long in that. Not without serious, military-grade winter gear. And yet, someone was wandering the F around out there, stepping on twigs, and crying. I am a reasonable, skeptical, sometimes arrogant agnostic, but I'm telling you, the voice sounded exactly like my mother's. My mom is alive and well and living in Southern California, so my brain instantly cramped at the sound of her voice out here in the Rocky Mountains. I would know my mother's voice anywhere. I think we all would. And I'm telling you, I'm about 90% sure it was hers, which is way too sure to not scare the shit out of me. I grabbed my light and went outside with a blanket wrapped around me and my hiking boots on. I circled the entire cabin and looked around. There was snow pushed out of the way in a big, meandering pattern that snaked in and out of the tree line, like someone was drunkenly shuffling around. Maybe they were injured. The path went right up to the bathroom window and then back into the woods. Each time the voice called out, I shouted, "Mom?" or "Who's there?" or "Who are you?" And each time the voice receded further into the woods. I'm pretty certain it was trying to coax me deeper and deeper into the forest, away from the cabin. I'm still alive because I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to die like some dumbass in a bad horror movie. I went back inside and made sure we were locked down tight. Since I can't call the ranger station, I'm posting this instead. I will keep you updated. Edit. It's Monday, and we got a hold of Faye's dad. The weather is supposed to clear up tomorrow, so he's going to come pick us up in his truck and help get my car down the mountain. I will keep you all informed. Only one more night in this place. I'll try to get some photos up. Edit. 9:30 p.m. Monday. I've been able to get online twice today. I wish I knew more about electronics, but I'm a history teacher, so I don't think I can fix the Wi-Fi or predict when it'll work. I can send and receive emails and some Reddit posts, but I cannot load some websites or view photos. Faye hasn't been feeling well since noon. She developed a stomachache and has been intermittently throwing up. We both ate the same thing and I feel fine, so I'm not sure what it is. She sometimes gets like this when she gets worked up. Although I'm an agnostic/atheist, she is very Catholic and is pretty convinced that something supernatural is going on. No need for alarm at the moment. She does not have a fever and I'm keeping her hydrated and in high spirits. She seems to be on the mend. Went to sleep about 1.5 hours ago. Some noises to report. Cackling, repetitive vocalizations in the forest, probably 100 yards out. The tree line starts at about 20 yards out, so this sound is coming from much deeper. Some movement spotted just behind the tree line at dusk, but could be elk, deer, etc. Couldn't see very much. Keeping all the curtains closed, windows locked, furniture in front of the front door and back door, and I'm checking on Faye every half hour. Her dad will be here in the late morning to pick us up and dig my car out. Another Redditor has pointed out that I am an idiot for not double-checking the weather. You are correct. I promise I'll provide an update as a new post tomorrow, should anything significant happen. I'm sorry for the delay, everyone. We are collecting ourselves. Sorry for any formatting issues, I'm writing this on my phone. Faye's dad picked us up in his truck. He brought his buddy with him, who is now following us in my car. A lot of things happened last night. Some things I won't share because I'm not sure how to interpret them yet. I'm not even sure I understand what happened. But here are the most important things. I also managed to get some recordings, which I'll try to upload when we get home to California in a few days. I tried to stay awake last night until 1 a.m., because over the past few nights, That is the approximate time the noises change from rustling and branches cracking to voices. I didn't make it. I fell asleep on the couch with my laptop open, waiting for the Wi-Fi to come back. I think this was at about 12:30 am. I woke up right around 1:15 am to a muffled voice. In my sleepy days I struggled to figure out where it was coming from. I thought it was just outside the living room window, so I sat there quietly trying to make the words out. It was a woman's voice and said things like, "A few days. It's not mine. I'm not alone, okay." I got up and peeked out the curtains and didn't see anyone, but then the voice said, "It's my parents' house," and I knew the voice was Faye's. As I mentioned earlier, my fiancée has an undiagnosed sleep disorder and has extensive sleep talk and sometimes sleepwalks. She has had pronounced night terrors since she was a little kid. I'll post a story on that someday. I walked into the bedroom to find Faye sleeping on her tummy as usual. She didn't say anything else as I came in. Two things really disturbed me about this situation though. The first is that she appeared to be having a conversation with someone, which is actually quite common for her, but the person she was conversing with was interrogating her, asking her questions about herself, me, the cabin, etc. Second, in her sleep, Faye was imitating another voice. It wasn't hers that she was speaking with, she was altering the pitch and tone to sound like a different person. My modus operandi is to not wake her up when she has sleep disturbances. There's a story behind this, expect one someday. Instead, I gently rub her back and hair, which calms her and puts her back to restful sleep. I did this for a few minutes, but then there was another noise, off in the distance outside. I got up and walked to the window to listen, and I think this was the first time that I really felt scared enough that I felt like we were in real danger. It was a child, singing in the dark. I couldn't really make out much of what he or she was saying, but I am certain that it was a child, probably aged 6 to 8, trying to sing a song. The snow had abated for a while now, and the stars were notably bright, so I could see all the way to the rim of the forest, about 20 yards out. There was a figure standing there just past the first trees, back facing me, looking up at either the moon or the tops of the trees. It stood so still that I convinced myself it was a tree stump or something, and in a few minutes, it was no longer visible. My skeptical nature compels me to be reasonable and say my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I turned around, Faye was sitting straight up in bed, eyes closed. She does this a lot in her sleep. She craned her neck and said something like, "Don't let him in," or "Don't let him inside." She was still doing the weird voice. So I woke her up. Faye and I sat in the bedroom with the lights on, talking about what we should do. I tried to get online to send an email to her parents, but of course, it doesn't work when you need it. We agreed to stay in the same room and try to fall back asleep. At one point I got up to get her some water. She hadn't vomited in several hours now and was feeling a lot better, and out the kitchen window, I saw flashes of pale light. They weren't like the flashes you'd see when someone walks through the woods with a flashlight. They were more like if someone had a lantern that they could slowly turn on and off. I flicked on the porch lights to the front and side of the house, hoping that it would discourage anyone from trying to approach. But as I walked back to the bedroom, I saw the distinct outline of a person through the window curtain in the living room. They were pressed against the glass with their hands on it, trying to peer inside. Since it was dark in the living room and bright outside, I could clearly see their silhouette. I shouted and approached the window, but the person ran off before I pulled the curtain open. Faye slept soundly, but I continued to hear voices outside. Different ones. On and off all night until dawn. I wrote several of them down. I couldn't sleep, so I camped out in the living room. I kept the bedroom door open so I could hear Faye if she started talking again. The voices would go away for hours and then start back up again. At one point I fell asleep because I was awoken by the sound of a light switch flicking on and off. From the couch I could see a light from outside, going on and off in patterns of 5. I can't explain why this disturbed me so much, but it did, and I imagined some kind of horrible creature standing in my house somewhere, flipping the switch up and down and smiling. My first instinct was to check on Faye, and I nearly had a heart attack when I saw that she wasn't in bed. I started calling her name and pacing around the house, looking out the windows to see if she was outside. When I looked out the kitchen window, there she was, sitting on the hood of my car about 30 feet out in the driveway. Her back was to me, and she was staring off into the forest. She was absolutely rigid, just the way she sits up in bed when she's asleep. Faye has sleepwalked all over the house back home in California. I've found her in the kitchen and the downstairs hallway and the living room, but she's never gone outside. I shouted her name from the kitchen, but the second I did, Faye jumped off my car and dashed into the woods at full sprint. She never looked back at me. I started flipping out and screaming her name over and over. I scrambled to grab my boots to go after her, but the second I pulled the front door open, Faye called out my name from behind. She was standing in the hall, looking confused, asking me what was wrong. Apparently she had been in the bathroom. In my masculine crusade I'd forgotten to check there. I looked out at my car and into the forest, and honestly, the first thought that came to my mind was, "You clever mother effer." Needless to say, we stayed up the remaining few hours until dawn, intermittently writing down the voices we heard, which faded away and became less frequent with the passage of time. I'll try to get the recordings up in a few days. For now, here is that list of voices we heard. We recalled some of the voices from the previous nights from memory, but I just figured you'd like to know what was being said throughout the duration of this lovely cabin experience. I will return to Colorado, but F. Pikes Peak. The questions indicate that the words were very unclear. A man's voice, vaguely familiar, but couldn't put a face to it, over the past several nights. "Hello? Oh God, look at it. Look. Hello." It sounded desperate. Kind of wailed dramatically, "Don't. Don't. They see in the dark. I'm lost. I'm lost. Wash you, wash you, wash you, wool my, wool my." Like a growled, hacking sound, reminded me of Gollum. Shouted in anger, "It's very dark, I see those lights." Shouted, "I'll come down there. Don't smile. Don't smile. I see you." Could have been, "Goat smile." Last night, a woman's voice, sounded around age 20. Gasp in horror, surprise over and over. Lay it on the ground, and burn it, turn it. La 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 la, la 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 la. It was monotone, not melodic at all. She talks in her sleep. She's talking to me now, in a threatening, malicious voice. Last night, a child, sounded about 6 to 8 years old, indeterminate sex. Crying, whining. Occasional laughter. Singing. "Oh so me I do, why do I do, eat, 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 I am a vacant, naked, so me I do." Not sure if this is actually English, or if my mind is just forcing the sounds into English. "When do we go inside? When do we go inside?" With a very unusual intonation. Sounded like a robot trying to mimic a child. The voice of my mother, a few nights ago. "Stop!" Laughing, joking. She has a recognizable Bostonian accent. "Look at the windows. Did you see it?" Voice of Faye's grandfather, a few nights ago. Lots of indiscernible groaning, calls for help. Something about the war. They bodies still in the ground there. Never found them. But they're there. Right here. Right here. Oh, they found it. They found it. Ah, I'm standing in the same place, 20 years. By the way, I forgot to check to see if that dream catcher was still there out back. You're welcome to drive out there and look for yourself though. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like and comment your thoughts. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing as well.